right, so you should have this document open. We were going to turn this person, this image into a caricature, if you will, like a cartoon character, right? And we are going to be focusing primarily on her head, not really all of those other details. So, for example, if I zoom out real quick here, you'll see, right, like there's the brick, the mortar, the chair that's, or the bench that she's sitting on, her jacket, the little jewelry that's hanging onto her shirt. Like, we're not going to worry about those details. We're primarily focusing on her head, and that's it. And we will be using the pen tool. So last week, you guys have done all that practice trying to get those skill sets up and built using that pen tool. So we're going to now use those techniques here, and we're going to be creating. Well, let's talk about last week. So last week, you guys were using the pen tool to create what? What were you tracing, and what were you ultimately creating with those? Right, shapes, right? Strokes and fills. So you would trace the object, and then you'd have a shape that had a fill and a stroke, right? So that now remember, that's also a vector type piece of work, right? Like that's vector, right? The shape tool or the pen tool as you create shapes, that's vector based, right? And if we remember what we learned about vector based items they're mathematical equations. They don't pixelate as you make them bigger or smaller. Right, there are no pixels. Well, I mean, you can see them. There are obviously pixels there, but you're not manipulating pixels. It's all mathematical equations that's kind of making it appear as they appear. The opposite of vector, which is, you should know this, it will be on the English certification exam. It's not vector, it's raster based. Raster equals pixels. If you guys don't have that committed to memory, you need to write that down in your notes to study, right? So vector mathematical equations does not become pixelated as you make them bigger, smaller. Raster-based is pixel-based, which means if we stretch and make them bigger or smaller, they're going to be pixelated. You also can't go in and change the settings in any panel, right? Like once you paint the pixel, it's there. So that's raster-based. So with this particular type of edit, where last week you guys were creating shapes, this week we're going to actually trace, but we're going to basically be painting pixels. And we're going to be using the path tool, which is created with the pen tool. We're going to be creating paths that will allow us to create those brush strokes. Okay? So if you can imagine creating brush strokes on our documents would well, like for example, it just wouldn't be as smooth and nice, if we tried to do that freehand. It just doesn't. I mean, unless you have really good dexterity, then maybe so. But the pen tool allows us to create nice, smooth lines that help us to create a better looking graphic, right? It will almost look as if it's vector based, but again, remember, we are painting pixels here. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get to it. First thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we add a new layer. We're going to call this layer trace. We're going to call this layer trace, because we're going to be tracing everything on this layer. So again, to get started, we created a new layer. We called it trace. Trace. This is the layer that we're going to be placing all of our tracing on. I cannot stress to you enough, there's probably two parts of this where people make the biggest mistake. One of this is not making sure that you have the correct layer selected. Okay? Because as we get deeper into this project, this type of edit, you will be having to select and create multiple layers, and well, if you're not working on the right one, you're going to have some issues. So trace is where we're tracing all of our paintbrushes for this particular type of edit. Right. The second thing we need to do, let's go ahead and set our brush setting to black. Right. So if we click on the little color cube down here, let's make sure that we have that foreground as black, and then we'll change the settings of the brush tool here later as we get a little deeper into this edit. Okay, so we have a new layer trace. We have our color cube for our foreground set to black. Let's go ahead and jump into this first edit, which is creating the path for our brush stroke. Now, last week, you guys worked with the pen tool, but you did so in the capacity of it creating shapes, right? So this is the other area where people will, and I've done this. Like it's easy to do. You just forget about it, or you created a shape and then now you want to create a path and you forget to change it. So we always need to make sure that as we're creating these outlines that this is set to path. That's really the only setting that you have to worry about with the pen tool. So make sure that you have that set to path. All right, I am going to zoom in a little bit on her head, just because, well, that's what we're working with here, right? Let's try that again. There we go. Boom, there we go. All right, and then we are going to outline her hair. So if you imagine kind of like the hair as an entity of its own, right? It has a shape. It surrounds her face. So we're going to create that shape by outlining it with our path tool. So again, I'm going to jump back into my pen tool. Shortcut is P. And it really doesn't matter where you click. I'm going to click here. You feel free to click wherever you want. But we're just going to trace the outline of her hair. It does not have to be exact. It does not have to be perfect. Remember, hold the Alt key to terminate that point. Otherwise, you're going to get that continuous curve. And then it does kind of fall across her cheekbone here. Terminate that path. And if you're watching here, you can see I'm not grabbing every strand of hair. That would be a little ridiculous if we tried to do something along those lines. I'm going to come back to this guy, though, because I think I like this detail here. Remember, I'm just using the Alt key to change those angles. And we do have to come right back around her face here, kind of framing it. There we go. So if you're watching me through that process, I'll go ahead and zoom in so you guys can see this a little better, right? So I started right here, kind of just followed along, tracing her. It's not perfect, right? And I'm not trying to grab every strand of hair, because again, that would kind of be ridiculous. So again, we're looking for the shape. Here's a good example of that, right? And again, I'm not grabbing that. Just kind of loosely interpret where her hair falls. There we go. Coming back around. And right back where we ended up. Okay. Now, I am going to have you pause there for a second. I do want to draw attention to some of those other pen tools. And you may have noticed as you guys were practicing last week. Right? So there are a lot more, well, I wouldn't say a lot more as in like there's hundreds, but there are some more pen tools that you can use in the creating of your path or shape. And then, of course, so for example, we have the freeform pen tool. This works very much like the lasso tool, where you just basically click and draw to create your shape. We also have the curvature pen tool, which this can be very helpful if you're not really good at making curves. This tool here can really help you kind of clean things up. And of course, we know about the add, delete, and convert point tool. These three we already covered. These are the only really two new ones. So freeform pen and the curvature. So I'll just show you real quick what that looks like. Let me delete all this stuff because that's from the last class. All right, so with the Freeform pen tool, right? All that does is allow us, we can click, and we're just holding that click, and then we're dragging our mouse to create that shape. And when we come back and we get the circle, we release, that will create the path. If I convert this to a shape, same thing. There's our shape. Let me give this a fill so you guys can see it. Right. So again, the free transform, or the free transform pen tool allows you to do just that. Just kind of click and draw. Okay. The other one is the curvature pen tool. Now this is a really neat tool because you don't have to click and drag, right? We just click to make a point, click to make a point, click to make a point, and look what happens. Like I'm not clicking and dragging, I'm just clicking and all I'm doing is just clicking. Right? It is automatically creating that curve for me. Now I can click and drag and I can change it. But look at that. It's just a really nice tool. So again, if you have problems or difficulties creating those curves, those nice smooth curves, that curvature pen tool can certainly help. Now on that note, with the curvature pen tool, I can go back and forth from one pen tool to the next, right? So here I created this path with the pen tool. If I come over here and switch over to the curvature pen tool, watch what happens, right? I can come in here and click on a point that already exists. Watch this. And I can clean up these curves. So if I didn't really do a good job there the first time, I can click and drag it around and it'll make it a little bit smoother. Or I can even add a point with that curvature pen tool. It really allows me to kind of make a little bit better shape there. Of course, again, we are creating a path, so I don't want to confuse you guys as to what we're doing here. All right, all that looks good. I could probably clean this up just a little bit. There we go. And again, I can add points, right? So maybe I want to include this little curly Q here, so I can go ahead and click plus, right? There's an add. I can click here. All right, so I'm just clicking to add points here, right? So again, it's a tool there to help you. Feel free to use it as you need it. It's a pretty good tool. All right, I can hear kind of some of the clicking start to slow down, so I'm assuming you guys have created that outline with the pen tool, which now we have a path. Make sure that we're using this as a path. Okay, and on that note, if you go to your layers panel, you'll see that there's also a paths channel. So your paths channel is where your paths live. So if I click on that paths channel, I can see my working path there. There it is, right? So there it is. So if you ever need to find any paths that you've created, you can go to that paths panel to find those working paths. I can rename this, right? I can double click on it and give it a name if I want. But for this exercise, that's not necessarily needed. We're not really managing too much of that. All right, so we're gonna jump back to our layers panel. So with that trace layer selected, I've created my path, right? I've already changed my brush to black, okay? Now I just need to make sure that I have the right size. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my brush tool real quick. I haven't hit enter, I haven't hit escape. I'm still working with this path. I'm gonna grab my brush tool, shortcut B. I'm gonna right click, and I wanna make sure that my hardness is set to 100%. Okay, my hardness is set to 100%. If I drag my mouse over my canvas, I can see how big that brush stroke is, and mine is currently set to 40. That is way too big, way too big. Okay, in fact, I'm going to drop this down to about 15. I think 50, yeah, 15 looks to be good. I'll zoom in so you guys can see that, right? So here's my brush settings. Okay, size is 15, hardness is 100%. We don't want blurry edges on our paintbrush here. I'm gonna jump back to my pen tool. Doesn't matter what pen tool, just as long as you have the pen tool selected. Okay, I'm gonna right click anywhere on my canvas, not in the panels, but on the canvas. I'm gonna right click on the canvas, and now you can see the options that we have with that path that we selected, or created, I should say. We can create a vector mask, which that should be something that you guys should know what that is. We can delete the path. If we want to delete it, we could delete it right there. We can define a custom shape, so now we can move it back into shape form. We can make a selection. So if you remember earlier on in the year, we talked about making selections using those selection tools, right? The marquee tools, the lasso tools, the quick selection tools, magic wand, paintbrush, object selection, right? Well, here's another way that you can create a selection by using the pen tool. So from the pen tool, you create that path, and you can make a selection based on that. Create new guides from shapes. You can fill the path. So if you wanted to paint inside of that path a specific color, you can certainly do that. But in this instance, we want an outline of the hair, so we want to go ahead and do stroke path. And then here you'll see your stroke path screen appears. And then from here, you can see there's a lot of options, right? We can add a pencil stroke, we can do brush stroke, we can eraser stroke, we can do background erasers, clone stamping. A lot of this you don't quite know what this stuff is. As we get through the year, you will learn what it is. You can smudge, blur, sharpen, dodge, burn, sponge, all these different options that we can apply or attach to that path. But as I alluded to earlier, we're going to attach a brush stroke. So we want to make sure that the tool that we're using here is brush. We've already set the settings to the brush, right? 15 pixels is the size. The hardness is 100%. The color is black. When we click OK, you'll see that it will attach that brush stroke to the path. So this is what you should have now. Right? All I did was click on the eyeball for the background. I just made the background disappear for a second. Okay, so that's what you're looking for, right? We have the outline of her hair. We've attached a brush stroke to the path. Now, again, I could have taken the paintbrush and traced the outline. Sure, I could certainly have done that, but I don't. My dexterity is nowhere near as smooth and nice as what I can create with the pen tool. Okay, but that's all that is. We just painted pixels. We attached those pixels to that path. Okay, so this is pixel-based. So we know pixel-based graphics are what? Raster or vector? Raster, right? So this is raster. Now, and the reason why we're doing it now, we could have created a shape, right? We could have created a shape, but that's vector, and the type of edit that we're doing with this, or that we want to do with this, is very raster-based, so we need those pixels. So that's why we're using the path to paint pixels so that we can keep this rasterized. All right, moving along. I'm going to hit Enter to accept that, or you can hit Escape. I'm going to bring back my image. I'm going to zoom in on her, kind of like her chin area. So shortcut 0, press the zoom tool. So right around in here is where I want to focus on. And I need to go ahead and remember we said we're just going to do her head, right? So her head's attached to the neck. We are going to include the neck. Plus this kind of makes this image a little more round, if you will. So now, here's a nice little rule of thumb to think about when doing this type of edit. When you're tracing, the larger the object is, the larger the brush stroke should be. Which the opposite of that is, the smaller the detail, the smaller the brush stroke should be. So the last thing we want to do is use 15 for our brush strokes for this entire trace. I mean, you could. It's going to look horrible. It's going to look awful, right? If you've ever seen a comic magazine, has anybody ever seen a comic magazine? And how, right, like if you look at the larger objects have a stronger stroke surrounding that object, and then the smaller details have smaller strokes. Okay, well, we want to go ahead and stay with that rule of thumb. All right, so we can do it now or we can do it later. We'll just hold off on that. I'm still working with the trace layer. I'm going to go back to my pen tool, and we're not going to close this shape. We're just going to create a line. Okay, so again, pen tool, path. We're using this as a path. Now, because I want to kind of like have her face be an actual shape, all I need to do is just connect this line to this line. So I'm going to create a line here. I'm going to click on the black right? That's the key. I'm going to click on that black line so that it's connected. And we'll go ahead and just kind of trace her chin here. That obviously is not quite what we're looking for, so we'll Alt. There we go. That is certainly what we don't want to have happen. There we go. That's a little smoother. Okay, so there's my outline, and it's the same process, right? Rinse, repeat. Okay, choose my brush tool, and that is way too big, right? That is way too big of a brush stroke. So I'm going to right-click. I'm going to bring this down to, I don't know, let's say about 9 maybe? Yeah, 9 seems to be good. Back to my pen tool. Again, right-click, stroke path, brush, okay. Enter to accept. I'm going to use the same brush stroke for her neck line, right? So back to my pen tool. I'm going to click on the black line here. I want this all to connect. Click and drag. And then I'm going to click again. Right click, stroke path, brush. Enter to accept. All right, so this is what we should have right now. Okay. So the process is this, right? If you were taking notes, right? Like this is pretty much a good third, if not half, of what you'll be doing for the next 2 weeks after we complete this together, right? You're going to trace your image, right? In this one, we're just doing just her head. In the future, you guys are going to be doing the whole image from edge to edge, top to bottom, left to right, corner to corner. So you'll have to outline everything in that image, okay? So again, you create that trace layer, grab the pen tool, create that path, set your brush size, go back to your pen tool, right click, and then add the stroke to path. Question, yes? Say again? The projection's not showing it. It's there. The question was on the projection screen. You can't see the checkered boxes, right? The transparency. It's there. It's just the projection is not showing it well. But I have it on my screen. So yes, the background should be transparent right now. If I bring back in my image, it'll go away. All right. So we have the hair, we have the face, we have the neck, right? So let's go ahead and continue with this. I'm going to zoom in on her mouth. That's going to be the next feature that we're going to trace. The mouth is a little bit smaller, right? So again, whether you change the brush setting just before you apply it, or if we want to start it now, we can certainly do that. So yeah, that's just way too big for her lips. So I'm going to adjust this. Let's make this down to 7. Actually, I'm going to go to 6. I think 6 might be better. Yeah, 6 is going to be a lot better. All right, back to my pen tool, right? So her lips basically are 2 different shapes, right? We have a top lip, bottom lip. So I'm just going to create that shape. So I'm going to click to round that, click to round that, click to round that, and then we'll click to round that. Boom, there we go. I'm going to hit Alt to terminate that curve. Okay, and again, right, I'm going to attach that brush stroke to the path, right click, stroke path, brush. Okay, we already changed the settings to 9. I could probably have made that a little bit smaller. We undo that. If you keep it 9, that's okay. That's kind of bothering. I think, yeah, 6. I think I'm going to go down to about 4. 4 might be a little better. Back to my pen tool, right click, stroke path. There we go. That's a little better. Enter to accept. I have to split the lip, so I need to make that line there, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click on the black line, because I do want this to be 2 separate shapes. We'll go right about here. Definitely don't like that. I'm going to need to change that angle. Alt. When we do that, I don't like the way that turned out. I just don't like the way that's turning out. Go again, right click, stroke path. Okay. Enter to accept. Okay. She has some dimples here. I'll go ahead and add some dimples. So little line here. Again, right click, stroke path. Uh-oh. Right click, stroke path. Enter to accept. Another dimple. Click and drag. Make that little dimple there. Right click, stroke path. Enter. Enter. Another dimple. Click. Right click, stroke path. Enter. Enter. All right, so there we go. Right there are her lips. And then we're going to finish the day on her eyebrows. Now you'll notice that her right eyebrow, to our perspective, her left, but her right eyebrow kind of gets hidden with part of her hair, which is fine. That's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and click on this dark black line because that's a shape. Okay. So I'll click on the line. Probably get that a little closer. Click on the line, and we'll go ahead and create that shape. There's that. There's that. There's that. I might go back into my curvature tool because I don't like the way that looks. Let's clean this up a little bit. Close enough. All right, again, right click, stroke path, enter, enter. Okay, and then our last eyebrow here. Oh, I'm on the curvature. And again, you can use whatever pen tool you like, whether it's the curvature tool, if you go straight to just the normal pen tool. I like starting with the pen tool by itself. Okay. Okay. Obviously, I really messed that up, so I'm going to go back to my curvature pen tool. Just to kind of fix this. Just want to show you how you can really use that tool to help you fix it up. So if you mess it up at the beginning, all right, use that other pen tool, a curvature tool, to help you clean that up a little bit. It's a very nice, handy tool. Okay, and again, right click and stroke path. There we go. This is where I want you to end the day. Right, so we have her hair outlined, we have her face is outlined, her neck is outlined, her lips are outlined. We've added some detailed lines with those dimples, and then we've traced and outlined both of her eyebrows. Okay, that's where we'll end. And again, all I did was just click on the eyeball for the background layer to make that go away so I could see it a little better. Questions? All right, there you go.